Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and our guest today is Jessica Britt. Hi Jessica.
Hi Iain.
And Jessica is a teacher in the Ridhwan school, which I've been a student of for about 18 years ago. And we're going to hear about Jessica's life, which is a very interesting story, and also hear about some of her work as well. So let's start with what we were talking about earlier before we started recording. You were telling me that when you were, I think, 3 years old, you were in hospital and you were in a body cast,
Yes.
and you had quite an interesting experience.
Yes, I had a felt feeling. First of all, this was a long time ago, and so hospitals were very different, and it was 12 children on one ward, and my felt feeling was being this consciousness. It actually touches me saying it, being this consciousness that was hovering, taking care of the children. And I had mostly a sense of the children and the suffering. I don't remember having much of a sense of my suffering. I was very aware of the children's suffering and profound sense of aloneness that was actually very sad. And so it was a sad environment, and some part of me rose up to it literally and responded in some way.
That's difficult when you're very young, isn't it? This sense of loneliness.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, one of the things I was sharing with you as I, was looking at different interviews that you've done and Renata has done, I was really aware of how many of the teachers we love and honor had really good childhoods. And I recognized that my destiny is quite different and that I had a really difficult childhood. And with tremendous amount of aloneness and unkindness in it, and neglect of a certain kind. And so I felt very alone, very isolated, and at the same time totally determined to figure out what this human life was about. Because my sense of the one I was having wasn't a very good one. And I thought, something is really off.
When were you first aware of this determination?
Interesting question. Probably around 8 or 9, 10.
Because it must have really impacted your character. Because I know for myself, when determination comes in, it really starts to change something.
It does. It actually gave me a sense of, which I recognized later, of inquiry. Like I really wanted to understand it. What was reality? What was being a human being? I actually truthfully didn't know or feel particularly human at that point. I was so withdrawn, but with a very curious, very watchful intelligence. And I can actually remember at one point telling my mother I wanted to see a therapist. And I can remember her saying, why? And I said, because I'm suffering. And her response at that time was, everyone suffers.
Yes, yeah.
Right? And so she didn't support it. So I went into, anyway, long story, I went into nursing school, and there my withdrawn nature, my solitude got the attention of my teachers, and they actually opened the door for me to work with my first therapist, actually the Freudian gentleman.
Right. So it took you quite a long time from 8 years old when you first had this feeling of determination to find out what life was about, until what, your early 20s when you were working as a nurse?
I was probably around 20 when I
Yes.
started seeing the Freudian analyst. Though he and I did face-to-face work. I mean, looking back, it was a fascinating process. First of all, he responded to my story in such a human way. I still, to this day, remember his tear when I was, it touches me now, when I was telling him something. And that was like, whoa,
Yeah.
right?
Because without going into details,
No,
you were abused when you were a child, so you had quite a heavy load to carry and a lot to explore and understand.
I had a lot to explore. It was a very abusive atmosphere for myself and my brothers from a stepfather. It's a very, I mean, one of the things, it's a very common story on the planet. So I found myself turning towards, I became a nurse, I found myself turning towards psychiatric nursing. I actually worked with children. I was just very infused with the knowledge of how much suffering there was, emotional suffering, for so many human beings.
But it must have brought you a lot of feeling of compassion for the children you were working with.
Totally.
From your own experiences.
Totally. I mean, one time, this is when I was still in nursing school, I had to write a treatment plan for a child that I was working with, beautiful, beautiful 3-year-old, who actually died of cancer, very touching. And I remember my nurse supervisor telling me I was too emotionally involved. And I remember knowing she was wrong, very clear, but I did shapeshift myself to do what she wanted, you know, wrote the report. But I knew inside that I was onto something that was much needed and real, and I needed to let my heart guide me, basically.
So you were starting to have the therapeutic sessions with the Freudian therapist. How did you find that?
Well, mostly I found it, I'd say, it organized the chaos of my story. Just telling the story, I mean, telling my experiences, and having someone listen. And it started to break open the feeling of isolation, actually. That was the main thing it did for me. It organized, so I felt less crazy. It started to make sense of why I felt the way I did, even though I wasn't fully into the feeling level of it yet. You know, that happened when I got to California.
But that's a relief in itself, isn't it, when you start to understand why you feel the way you do?
It was a huge relief. And I remember, I mean, I read like crazy. Like, I really wanted to understand what a person was, what an ego was. You know, I mean, I was just determined. And my determination basically got me out of the East Coast to California. And there, I mean, I've watched this. There, I worked as a nurse. Again, I went into psychiatric nursing as my main emphasis and worked with children. And out of that, I entered into the exploration of Jungian work. The Jungians do this thing called sand tray therapy, which is fascinating. And that went from the Freudian world organized my story, and then the Jungian world kind of opened up what's known as the world of the archetypes, large governing principles beyond my personal mother and father, like the great mother, the anima, you know, the female part of the, no, anima is the male, yeah, the female part of the man, the animus. So it opened up a larger view. And that's what I started feeling, like every new thing opened up a larger view.
So you were starting a journey, weren't you? Because you took from the Freudian work what you could take from the time. It took you to a certain level, and then there was something else that opens up. So you move on to the Jungian work?
Yes,
yeah.
Right. And actually, as you say that, what I realized, nothing, I mean, I went through a few, right? The one that really got my interest and has not let me go has been the diamond approach work. Yeah. So from the Jungian work, long story short, I ended up working with children in psychiatry. I ended up at Esalen Institute.
Which is in California.
Which is in California.
Yeah.
It was one of the original human potential centers. And Dick Price, who was one of the co-founders of Esalen, and his wife, Chris Price, had this program where they invited people working in the community with people with, like for a while I worked with children who had been raped and incested, very intense work. So Dick would invite people working in the streets to Esalen for a week of rest and their own work. And that's where I got introduced to Gestalt therapy.
This was homeless people he'd invited? When you
No, he invited like people like myself,
sorry.
the service workers, the nurses, the doctors,
yeah.
the therapists, the social workers. And that's where I first, things really broke wide open. That's where I first started experiencing Gestalt work. And so like everything I talked about in Freudian work, that I thought about in Jungian work, I actually started feeling in the Gestalt work. It was really quite an eye-opener for me.
You were coming really into your body at that stage, the beginning of a process of discovering your body.
I was totally coming into my body. I mean, again, graphic memory. My very first Gestalt group, I remember it with a smile, right? Chris Price did a guided imagery, and the content of the imagery was so based on my history, and I was lying there and I'm thinking, that brat, like she's gonna get me into feelings, right? I'm a New York girl, I'm sophisticated, right? And long story short, next thing I know, I am sobbing and crying, and Chris is on one side and Dick's on the other, and I mean, I've never had such an experience. And in that experience, as the sobbing softened, I remember, anyway, I remember to this day that my hands, my body felt so alive with my presence, with my consciousness. I was like startled, like I remember like just holding my hand up in wonderment. It made me realize how far away I was. It touches me to say it. I was so far away, so far away. And so I just became, it was like the feeling was, I'll do anything to stay and find out what this is here.
So that in itself was deepening your commitment.
It's true.
To take things to another level.
Yeah, I mean, it was so, you know how people really love, yes, I became an explorer. I became a total explorer of what it is that we are.
It must have been a very exciting time, because I remember interviewing this studio maybe a year ago, Claudio Nalengo, who also went to Esalen and worked there, and very much it was a whole new thing, wasn't it, where people were starting to explore themselves and find out more how they ticked, how they worked.
Definitely. I mean, Esalen, I was there in the 80s. So Claudio was more there in the 70s. I did not work with him directly, though of course I heard of him. I mean, he's made such incredible contributions, not only in the Enneagram, but also in Gestalt work. But you know, Stan Groff and R.D. Lang was there. I mean, Timothy Leary, you know, John Lilly. I mean, the wild ones.
It was the place, wasn't it?
It was the place.
Yeah.
Now, my focus really was on discovering, along with Chris Price and Dick Price, really working with myself and others, opening ourselves up to what really we're experiencing if we let the masks down, basically. If we really allow ourselves.
Was that scary for you?
Certain feelings were, and certain feelings were not. I was easy to get me to cry. Anger was a whole other thing. And, oh, that was a whole other thing. Anyway, I won't go into all the details, but I had this dream, and I knew if I worked on it with Dick Price, and there was a aggressive figure in the dream, and I knew he'd asked me to become it, And I knew for 2 years he'd been working me up to feeling my anger, right, directly. And I knew that if I sat on that seat, which he called the open seat, something unexpected would happen. So anyway, for some reason, I ended up on the seat. I mean, that something other than my mind put me on that seat. And I remember saying to him, if I tell you this dream, you're gonna, and I started crying, right? It was so, and he said, okay, let's just go for it. So needless to say, I had this very huge experience of aggression and anger and my own bottled up rage. What's spiritually significant about this that took on more and more meaning over time was that in the middle of feeling rage, and I was probably pounding pillows. I think people might have been holding me. I mean, I was furious, right? In the middle of it, some inner light of consciousness was there, right? And it had a sense of I, and it said, and I knew, I'm experiencing anger, and I'm not a killer. And then it went even, and I'm in the middle of raging while this is happening, right? And then it said, and then the feeling was, I have anger, but I'm not anger. You see what was so powerful there? I would never have known that if I hadn't had the space to feel the anger. I would have pushed it away out of fear of being it, right? And by allowing it in this very safe environment with people I loved and trust, who had a lot of presence, a lot of integrity, I discovered, oh my God, I have all these experiences, but some part of me is not these experiences. That was a very big door.
Yeah.
Very big door that's kept opening, actually.
Well, that is the big one, you're right, because I know for myself, when that started to happen, that intrigued me even more, because that was taking me, well, who am I really?
Right.
If I'm not all these experiences and these emotions, then who am I?
Right.
Which is the kind of the ultimate question, really.
I get chills when you say that. I feel touched as you say that. And maybe that's why we share a similar path of the Diamond Approach.
So you mentioned Diamond Approach again. Of course, Diamond Approach is a school that was started by Hamid Ali, W.H. A.H. Almaas is his writing name.
Right.
And you met Hamid at a very early stage, didn't you, before he'd started the Ridhwan School Diamond Approach work?
Yes. You know, as we were talking about earlier, you know, because of my early childhood, I was so fundamentally disembodied. I mean, the technical language would be disassociated. I was so in my own mental realm that the movement through organizing the story, mental realm, larger mental realm, Jungian, feeling realm, Gestalt work, but Dick Price and Chris were very body-centered Gestalt practitioners. So I wasn't living at Esalen yet, so I was looking for a Gestaltist to continue my work up in the Bay Area, and I couldn't find one that was body-centered. So someone suggested I find a Reichian therapist, someone who works with the breath and the body and emotions. And a friend said, why don't you start working with Hamid Ali? And I met Hamid, actually saw him at a social gathering, and he had the kindest face. And the other thing I realized at this moment, as we're talking about bodies, he walks with a cane because he had polio. And I remember thinking to myself, he will understand me, because I had been in this body cast for 3 years, and I had a very crippled self-image. So I chose him. And I had no idea he was a spiritual teacher. So the first couple of years, I just would go, you know, lie down, do the breathing work, have different emotions, feel my body more and more unwinding and opening. And then I noticed he started asking me questions that nobody had ever asked me before.
Such as?
Such as, I can remember this one time, he asked me, I had been breathing, you know, belly, chest. He said, what are you feeling in your chest? And I said, nothing. Now, in the past, you know, someone would have gone to something or had me breathe more till I had more of something to report. And he said to me, what's the nothing like? And I can remember just rolling my eyes, kind of looking up at him and saying, Hamid, what is nothing like? Nothing is nothing. So he's sitting there in his very kind way and he goes, well, is it a light nothing or a dark nothing? That was the most outrageous question anybody had ever asked me, right? I said, is it a light nothing or a dark nothing? And the impact of that question was I had to really, I'm shutting my eyes and really sense much more immediately and carefully. And I remember saying, it's a dark nothing. And he's saying, well, what's it like? Right? And in describing the undescribable, nothing, something opened, and I actually recognized I was feeling a kind of spaciousness in my chest. Right? That was like, you know, it was like I had taken some acid or something. You know, it was just like opened up this other door. And over time, I recognized where you and I might be talking and I might ask you this or that, he'd suddenly go, well, did you notice over here? What about that? And so his questions, because in Gestalt you're not supposed to ask questions, right? Opened up these other realms, right? That made me appreciate at a whole other level, that continues to have me appreciate at a whole other level, that what's I am, what you are, what everything is way beyond our normal mode of perception and understanding. If you ask the right question, if you slow down enough to sense and feel, reality reveals things that the young girl from New York never suspected.
You gave me some really comprehensive notes before the interview, which was very helpful. And I'm just going to read something which really kind of interested me, because from the early sessions with Hamid, you wrote that he was helping you to awaken to the beginning of a recognition of different levels and dimensions of being present in name, present in feeling, present in body, present in consciousness. Can you talk something about those different levels of presence?
I think just a very simple way of saying it, what I began to recognize as my own sense of self started being released from just my history. What I recognized is that if I go to a party and I know my name and I know who my parents are, right? I could say, I'm here, I'm at the party, right? And then I noticed that as I learned about feelings, my sense of this here-ness took on another palpable octave, fullness, richness. And it was like, oh, wow, now I'm really here, right? And then my body and my sensing and my recognizing, because I've been out of my body, so now I'm like in it, I'm going, I am my body. Oh my God, right? Now I'm really, 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 really here, right? I'm really here now, full, embodied, right? And then as the inner realms started opening, first really feeling the inner spaciousness, inner qualities like compassion, strength, I slowly began recognizing they were not just reactive feelings. there was a palpable feeling of kindness. And it was like the sense of here-ness took on a whole other texture, right? Like now I'm here not only in feelings, belly, I'm actually here in presence, but then it became even more interesting. Like now I started noticing not only am I in my body, the sense of consciousness, the sense of I, was less located in my history. Like I could hardly remember my history. Like self-thought or self-awareness, less and less and less was attached to history. And more was a feeling of the simplicity of awareness, a kind of palpable, yeah, these things are hard to talk about, a palpable presence that was a new feeling of now I'm really here. And what's here is way more than my history. It's colored by my history. It's textured by my history. Right? So like the light of the awareness itself, I feel a lot of love right now, actually, as I'm speaking.
Yeah.
You better ask me a question. Like I'm on a roll, but yeah.
What I'm thinking as you talk is that in a way this is very different from what other people sometimes say, that the body can be like an entrapment. The body is, you get caught and that reinforces the I, the kind of the narrowness of the human self, whereas your experience has been from your disassociation from your body as a child because of the traumatic experiences, and coming back through these different therapies you did into the body, and the body not only has started to give you an idea of who you are on a human level, but it's expanded it beyond that.
Beautifully said, yes. And as you say it, I'm in touch with some sadness for people who see the body as a solid object. I mean, if one takes spiritual teachings really deeply, really seriously, you see Buddhism, let's say, emptiness. What are they talking about? You know, they say basically, so this body can be experienced as transparent, as an open system. Right? I can feel my body as dissolved and just spaciousness. I can feel it as it started happening as I was talking about it, as love. It's not just an emotion. And so the body itself is not something separate from beingness. It's not something, it's not just where this being that kind of enters the body, you know, it's like if one takes the spiritual perspective and really hears it fully, it must include the body. Must. The body can't be separate from true nature.
And the important thing, that was your experience as well. That was it was a kind of the portal, the gateway for you, wasn't it?
It was the gateway for me. It was the gateway for me. Now it was the gateway for me for the miracle of life.
Yes.
For love manifesting. We can talk about awareness manifesting. We can talk about appearance and emptiness coexisting. I mean, there's so many different ways of talking about it. And also I realized each person's conversation is a contribution. Because the miracle of what the totality is, no one person can give voice to. No one enlightenment can give voice to. Each one of us has a different purpose, different destiny. I mean, one of the things I've come to realize through the path, right, is a lot of students I work with, I mean, especially people who really have tough histories, the fact that I walked through that valley and am so okay, right, from the most disappeared dark place to really feeling the luminous goodness of reality is part of my function.
But it also took that commitment early on and the courage to follow it through, the determination and the adventure of finding the different therapies that helped you, and
Right.
one thing led to another. It's not always a straightforward, easy journey, is it? You really have to follow the clues and stay in there and stay with the feelings, as you were saying.
Right. I mean, basically, it really helps if you got a strong, strong curiosity.
Yeah.
Right? That won't be stopped.
There's one thing you put in your notes I also wanted to bring up briefly, which I thought was interesting, was that in the early days you tried meditation and it didn't work for you. It took the discovery of the body and the broadening of who you really are until meditation was something that was important in your life.
Yes, you know, it was really interesting for me contemplating my journey to be here with you today. And I suddenly saw, you see, so many people whose path really has been through the classical meditation path, you see. I'm struck by a lot of them had really good parenting. Not everybody, right? I was already in such aloneness. For me to go sit on a pillow alone, there was too much congestion and suffering in this location. I couldn't do it. Right? It was like I needed to uncongest myself to even have enough room. I can remember I went on this 2-week meditation retreat. And I'd already started working with Hamid. I was in so much pain and suffering. I felt like a total failure. And I went and saw Hamid, and I said, phew. And he said, Jessica, you know, kindness, kindness. Just from the body cast, it was just to be sitting in that posture. Whew. So I needed, this is my location, I needed to open up some space where I could even begin to sit. Like, you know, when I love the Dalai Lama, he's one of my inspirations. You know, he talks about how loved he was. So he's sitting learning meditation surrounded by love. Right? That wasn't my beginning. Yeah. So when I sat on the zafu, I still was feeling like an empty shell with no love around. And the zafu just felt like basically being in prison. And I didn't have enough inner resources yet to understand the nature of the prison.
How long did it take you from first working with Hamid Ali and starting the Diamond Approach work, till you really started to feel that you had a ground that was supporting you? You were really on your way, so to speak.
Good question. Let's see, so I started with Dick and Chris probably in '74, met Hamid in '76. I would say, by the time, probably by '84, '85, I started feeling some kind of palpable inner ground. And as I say that, I'm also recognizing one of the wonders for being graced with living in Big Sur for 10 years was literally all the movement work I did started giving me legs, the walking I did, the hiking. So I started feeling an internal ground, and I started feeling deeply connected to the literal earth ground, and it all worked in harmony.
Was there any particular breakthroughs you remember that were really important, things that you did or realizations you had?
There's so many. Do you have a particular level you're interested
in? I'm just very interested in when, you know, you had the early adventures, you were going through the different therapies, and then you stayed with the Diamond Approach work for 30 years or something now.
Yeah, which is beyond a therapy.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's almost a way of life, isn't it?
Right.
What were there? You talked about one of your first sessions with Hamid. What were your kind of the other really impactful times, or some of just one or two of them as examples?
Well, it's interesting this comes up. I can remember my being in dialogue with Hamid, and before I had the conversation with him, I think must have been driving to go see him or something, and I was doing my practices of sensing my arms and legs, and I started going through, and I said, okay, I feel my feelings, I feel my body, I even feel my awareness, right? And I suddenly realized I had no idea who or what I was.
Mm.
It was the strangest thing. And so I went into this session or conversation, I don't remember the context, Hamid said, Hamid, you know, I feel my body, I feel my emotions, I know what I'm thinking, I feel my awareness, I feel the I that's aware of all these things, and I don't know who I am. It was this innocence, right? And I remember him saying, I was wondering when you would notice. Oh, I remember that because I was in a group. I was in a group meeting. And he said those words, and all of a sudden the whole room started spinning. I mean, spinning. And I fell into this huge black space. Right? Many people write about this. I fell into this huge black, like the Black Night space, and the stars, and I suddenly really felt myself as a point of light. And as I was having that, I remembered that point of light for when I did that anger piece I told you about. And I started feeling, I get chills, that point of light as I. That was so beyond history. And then over time, that point of light became like a anchor. And then it started changing. And I can remember going, where's the point? Where's my point of light, right? Because it was just space, right? And then it started opening up, right? So the thing just keeps opening, you see. I mean, in the diamond approach, we call it open-ended inquiry. No place is the final resting place. Anyway, it just keeps opening.
But this interests me. So, who you are is constantly changing, and yet you don't lose your ground of support, even though who you are is changing, or who you feel you are, or your experience of who you are is changing. The ground of being, shall we say, it's still supporting you. Is that the case?
Yes, but it's even more mysterious than that.
Go on, yeah.
Because the ground sometimes feels like just dense holding, and sometimes it feels like nothing is ground. Kind of like the night sky that holds the planet, right? That from a little girl feeling the emptiness as totally deficient and void, the emptiness or the spaciousness becomes an openness that creates the space for everything to arise. And the openness itself, paradoxically, becomes ground.
So what does being awake mean to you?
What is being awake? It means a love affair with reality. It means a sense of the grace and luminous that's at the core of everything that manifests, even hatred. Even hatred.
So explain that. So when we think of being awake, we think, well, that's someone that's moved beyond hatred. Well, when I've used the word we, but that will be my understanding. that it's moved beyond hatred?
I don't know if it, first of all, I don't believe in anything as final,
Okay.
right? When I said even hatred, just very quickly, I had been doing a group for people with abuse histories,
Okay.
and it was particularly intense group, particularly intense feelings. Big compassion came into the room, right? There was and I was furious. I was about reality. This is maybe 15 years ago. I don't know, I'd have to really think about that. And I went to a session with him, and I was stumping, and I was just furious. And actually, I wasn't going to touch on this, but and I was furious with God. That would allow.
Well, we all go through that sometimes, being furious with God.
Yes, yes. And I had never fully let myself really feel the depth of my fury. And Hamid really created the space. He even went to Gestalt. He had me put God on the pillow. And as I was in this full thing, my concept of God got revealed as just cardboard. It just dissolved. It was like, whoa. And the room was full of this kind of light of love. So I went from being totally pissed off to, oh my God, God is just a concept in my mind, at least in my concept of God. It dissolved, and what's here is just this incredible love. So I left that session, I'm like in this grace and love, and it was perfect. I'm driving down the highway in Berkeley. The sun was setting. The colors were pink and gold, and I remembered I had to make a phone call. Those days there were no cell phones. So I stopped, got on a payphone, and there was a parade. I'm telling my friend, this is incredible. My God, it's like, my God is beyond God. And I said, not only that, there's a parade happening. And the parade, it was Berkeley, was a Ku Klux Klan anti-everything parade with people with the white things. I was shocked. I was like, whoa. And I looked into the eyes of the man leading the parade. He was saying terrible anti-human being things. And his eyes were black points of hatred. I just looked. And then this is my experience. I saw, it was like, it's going to be a weird way of saying, like that black point of hatred was like the most any contracted point of love turned in on itself. And I thought, oh, what kind of childhood did that boy have, right? And so the recognition is that love is more primary than hatred. And hatred is, in a certain way, the result of being so cut off from love, even in the human form, whether you're feeling it at the cosmic level or not. That, anyway, I should stop here. Yeah, I'm on a roll, anyway. So that's all I want to say about that.
What do you feel as most helpful for you these days in your, let's call it your journey? As you mentioned, it's an ongoing process. Who you are is changing and does change from time to time. Do you have a practice that you do regularly that is particularly helpful?
Well, my main practice is being present, being aware of what I'm experiencing as intimately and as immediately as I can be, whether it's a positive state or a negative state, and being curious. Even if it's a positive experience, like, what's really here? If it's a negative state, what triggered it? What's really here? What am I taking myself to be right now? How am I really seeing the other? Am I really seeing the other? So it is a certain kind of lived awareness and wonderment about the whole evolution, truthfully. Like my working question right now, I love these working questions. I have questions. So my working question right now is looking at the whole arc of evolution in time and space. How does a star gain a heart? Or what is the purpose and function of the human heart? Right? If we look at the whole movement, right, of evolution, it feels like the human heart is at the forefront of our evolution right now. Being personal, like we were talking about the transcendence, really living, right? We don't get to I don't get to just, I'm not called to just, quote unquote, be transcendent. It's like, it's not up to me in a certain way, what I'm experiencing.
Talk more about that. It's not up to you what you're experiencing.
Well, you know, in a certain way, it's like radical openness. Radical openness, like right now, actually, I'm feeling a lot of grace. I'm really enjoying being here with you. This is probably the most contact you and I have had, right? I'm liking, you know, I'm feeling pleasure in it. I'm feeling love. I feel transparency. And I feel the goodness, right, with you. And I feel you're feeling the goodness with me. That feels really like something evolutionary about that, is my feeling about it. Right, so that's my question, like, oh, stars are becoming hearts. Right? And what will creation, what's the absolute up to? You know, what's the mystery up to? What's the...
There was one question that I had written down, which I really want to ask you.
Like
and it's, we have this, it's almost like a dilemma. We've done so many interviews on Conscious TV, Renata and I, and a lot of them have been on non-duality, which has been, I won't say restricted interview, but it's been on a certain subject, a way of looking at things. And there's been different opinions on how people wake up. And a lot of people say that whatever they do in terms of work and determination and what else, when they did feel they woke up, then it was a kind of grace of God. And all that work they'd done didn't really contribute directly to the work at the waking up. And I just wonder what your experience is of the times of when you've had the breakthroughs. Is it because of the work? Did the work contribute? Or did it happen in spite of the work? Was it a combination?
Yeah, it's a great question. My lived experience is there's no one answer. For some people, the waking up is just grace. I think that's true, right? For some people, it's a hard work. I'm a hard worker, right? It's like I needed, quote unquote, to follow the urge, like we call that determination, that curiosity, that love of the truth, wherever it takes you. Why did I have that in my soul? Not everybody has it, right? So we could say that's grace, right? And something that felt like a personal I chose to engage it. So I could say, okay, I was in partnership with it. And for a long time, that is the felt experience. And other times I can say that that feeling of that young girl, she wasn't seeing herself objectively. Right? She herself wasn't arising out of the whole. So it depends on where you're located, how you answer that question. I don't know if that's helpful or not. Well, my personal experience is that it's a combination of both. Like it's the form working with the formlessness. It's the sense of the individual soul working with reality. It's true nature working through the individual soul. I mean, we could talk about this so many different ways, and they're all valid.
And there's also a debate about whether consciousness can evolve. There's some people say consciousness is consciousness, and you become awake, you discover who you are, and you're the never changing, or there's different ways that people talk about it, the phrases, and that's who you are, and that's it. And there's other people, and I think you're in the other group, where you feel, you know for yourself, that there is a constant evolution of consciousness.
I'm definitely in that group.
Yeah.
But I would also allow both, you see, because the inner nature of the consciousness and the dynamism that's unfolding, and I do my own felt sense, is evolving. This conversation you and I are having right now, and how we're experiencing each other and ourselves having it, is relatively new on the planet, right? Certainly between a man and a woman, right? Occasionally conversation. Anyway, but there is within that changing the unchangeable. That's part of the mystery, you see. That's part of the openness that the ego mind, the usual mind, can't think. How can I have evolution of the unchanging? You know, one way we could say that the forms coming out of the unchanging are evolving in their capacity to express and reveal the full potential of the unchanging in all of its manifestation. Right? One way we could say it.
Well, I think the important thing, I know for myself, the important thing is following the potential, whatever I feel is me,
right.
And that, like you, it changes over time.
Right.
And I think that's probably the message that, not the message so much, but what we try and do at Conscious TV. It's about presenting all these different ideas, and something somewhere is moving forward,
right.
whether it's moving forward
right.
to discover itself or moving forward as
right.
because
right. I totally agree with you.
Because the universe is always expanding, we know that scientifically.
Right.
So why shouldn't consciousness always expand?
That's my orientation with the unchanging there.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I love what you're doing on the Conscious TV. You know, having all these different voices, I think, is just a great service to people.
Well, it's a great adventure, and that's
it is a great adventure.
We have about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you, hasn't come up, you'd like to just quickly talk about in the last 3 minutes?
Well, I think the one sentence I'd like to say, because I'm feeling it right now, that came up while we were chatting earlier, is back to the body, right? I'm just really aware of my experience right now, which continues to be very light, transparent, mischievous, that this question of formlessness, and the mystery of that, from my location, is more completely understood if we include the body, because it's the form we are most intimate with. Right? That's what I think I'd like to say.
Yeah.
Right?
So we're born with a body, and the body grows, and the adventure seems to be that we hopefully grow in terms of understanding, and the feeling of who we are grows, and everything else, and in the end...
so as you say that, right, this image of this death, I was with a friend when she died, and we had the great privilege of having her body for 3-4 days. You know, and so what I see is the soul, the consciousness expands. You know, the body is a living, like a caterpillar, the body is a living cocoon that's not separate for a long time with the consciousness that it nourishes and feeds and is a part of. And then in death, it does appear the consciousness expands beyond the body. So, is the body then an object? You see, or does the body become a part of the universal soul and the soul and consciousness of the earth? So I just leave you with that.
You leave us with more questions than we started, which is it's good.
Very good. I'm very glad. Questions are the way.
Jessica, Britt, thank you very much for coming along to Conscious TV. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
And thank you everyone for watching us here at Conscious TV, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.